Now let's take a look at the Task Pane Chart tab. And in PowerPoint, when we're looking at it, that's the only tab that exists in the task pane because it's in Excel that we establish the data sets, the graph data. In PowerPoint, we're just focused on creating the charts. And so in the task pane, you'll find the main macro descriptors and settings for the charts. When you select a chart, there's a blue outline that shows the chart whose parameters are shown in the task pane. So for instance, if I go over to this slide, it's still the other chart that is shown in the task pane until I click on this and I see the blue outline. So let's go back, click select, and we know that the task pane is now refreshed for the data and settings of this chart. So starting at the top, we have the chart name. This is very handy to name your charts with a unique identifier that as it goes into your library, you can choose it and know exactly what chart it is. It's also, again, part of our human approach where you just remember the name of the chart. And if you have a favorite chart, you can just drop it in by name in the clone window. For instance, if you have a favorite comparables chart or a favorite markets chart, you can just insert it by name, which is very convenient and time-saving. The next is the chart type. From compatible chart types, you'll be able to choose from this drop-down window. So we can change it to bar, column, line was the original one, or maybe we had area, area chart, and spider. You can also choose spline to format the lines, any lines, whether it's an area or regular line, to be in the form of a smooth spline. You can also add tags to your charts. So if your descriptor has to do with a specific client and you have a good structure area chart, you can also say client 1 space, and then when you hit the space bar and click out of it, that tag is also useful for identifying this chart from your library if you wanted to place it somewhere else. The assigned graph data is the graph data you chose to populate the chart. But if you need to choose another one, you can go ahead and do that from your graph data library. So if you have a kind of chart that you like, but you want to populate it with different data, you can go ahead and click on the other data set to populate it. This information is very useful because it can tell you which version and from which file that graph data emanates, and therefore making it a little bit less ambiguous as to which graph data you're talking about in your graph data library. The chart style is set at default, and as I mentioned before, when you insert a new chart, it picks up the characteristics of the slide on which you're rendering it. But you can also define styles and then apply them again. So for instance, if we wanted to make this a white chart, we can just do that. White background chart with the default color schemes, gray, and so forth. You can define your own charts. I did one with a pink background, like the color pink, so let's look at the pink background, manage style, and there you go. Let's go back to default. And click on manage styles as well. So we can actually save this chart with its color scheme, with the way it's set up, and say save selected as style. And then go into new item and say, this is, let's call this gray modern. And then that's gray modern. Moving right along here on the task pane, we can also choose the color palette. Right now it's set to Office. That means it'll pick up whatever the color palette is set for that slide in Office is the color palette that it'll use. But you can also go in and change the color palette here at a macro level. As we said before, you can also make the chart non-editable by clicking on No, Locked. And also, you can introduce the element of stacking here for the compatible types that are stackable. Obviously, this is grayed out if it's not a chart type that can be stacked. So you can choose stacked for one on top of the other, and you can also then choose a percent stacked. For compatible chart types, you can also invert the axes. This makes it very useful and easy without transposing the data to essentially transpose the chart itself. For area charts, you can do a macro opacity level setting. And this is a very important thing that most people aren't aware of because most charts are not editable in terms of driving data changes and calculation changes. You can choose the minor and major edit interval for when you're dragging the charts to set to a certain level. So here it's by default set at 0.01. Why? Because when you have a percent chart, it automatically works well. But we can set this to, let's say, 10. And set this to 50. And now the minimum edit interval will be 10. So if I grab this and I change it, you see it's only changing by tens. We can also set the chart title here. Again, these are the macro parameters that are in the task pane. You can say this is our good structure chart. And good, goose structure, that's not good. Good structure. And we can also choose the X and Y axes, vertical and horizontal axes, as well as the legend title and write it in here. I'm going to show you more detailed formatting in the in-chart editing and in-chart formatting functionality that we have, which makes it very easy. Just a few more things to show you now on the task pane. One is to show history. You can turn this off, and therefore the chart, although editable, you'll not be able to undo and redo. We have a very convenient function that is built into and set by default in our charts where even if you change value, as I did before, you can go and say, oh, I want to undo all to the original. It's been re-rendered since then, so let me just drag it and show you the undo chart functionality. Undo all. It goes back. This is very good for in-presentation versioning or while you're analyzing your data and your calculations to undo and redo either by steps or in total. However, sometimes you don't want that functionality. For instance, if you have charts that have only non-editable series in them, sometimes you turn that off to designate that if you don't have the little time bar in the corner, it's not an editable chart. It's an output chart that, although it syncs live and is updated immediately with changes in data, it's not something that you can set and drag. The other is to show tooltip. You can turn the tooltip off because here we have these cool tooltips where you can actually click into them and change the values very conveniently with a number pad or by using your computer keyboard, etc. But sometimes those get in the way, so you can just turn them off. And as you can see here, it doesn't show them anymore. Here's the transpose data function, which doesn't transpose the axes of the chart itself. It actually transposes the data underneath so that you don't have to restructure your data when using ActiveGrafs. You can use them just as you would in your normal workflow in your model as you would model it, but then you can regroup by transposing the data and seeing if that makes more sense to have the series exchanged with the categories. Let's go back. One more function is that, remember, we've attached this graph to graph data. And the graph data itself has certain series names and series in it. You don't have to use all of them, though. And for the purposes of the specific chart, you can change the data labels. So you can say that I don't want to use these. I just want to use 2 of the data series. And I want to change the labels to international, international, and domestic. So these change the data labels for the purposes of this chart only, and it doesn't change the original data. Similarly with category names and labels. Right, so now we have covered the task pane and formatting and macro settings for a chart.